You're listening to my WorldNet Daily exclusive audio article. Today's WorldNet Daily exclusive is entitled, Jefferson Was Not a Slavery-Loving Monster. Why do kids grow up to be gangbangers or entrenched racists? Possibly because it's what they've been exposed to, all they've ever known. Why are there generations of welfare families? It's all they've ever known. Why do people perpetuate strange habits or customs? They've grown up with them. It's, again, all they've ever known. In fact, there are many strange and even abhorrent customs that have lasted centuries, and looking back at them through a modern-day lens, one can only think, how could this possibly happen? How could people not only tolerate this, but consider it normal behavior? Practices like human sacrifice survived for centuries, as did the penalty of being crushed by an elephant and ritual suicide. Civilizations tolerated and even accepted them because, again, it's all they've ever known. Slavery, as awful as it was treated in the same manner, but unlike human sacrifice and death by elephant, legal slavery still survives today in civilizations that place a lesser value on some human life, but not in America. Thanks to our founders and their vision of a way out, slavery hasn't existed for over a century and a half. But today, some of them are getting a bad and undeserved rap. Thomas Jefferson is a perfect example of this. For centuries, Jefferson was revered as the author of the mission statement of the United States, the Declaration of Independence. Now, all of a sudden, he's practically enemy number one. And why? They say because he owned slaves. They being the radical Marxists of the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. Oh, and he was white, which is damnable in of itself. It's therefore easy to second-guess or judge Jefferson on the subject of slavery through the lens of the 21st century. For many whites from a young age, it's the only thing they knew. It doesn't mean they weren't conflicted. They surely were. But with age comes wisdom, and most of the founders, if they didn't eventually become outright abolitionists, came to realize how abhorrent the practice of slavery was. This was the catalyst for the 3/5 clause in Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution. As stated, Thomas Jefferson was a perfect example of this conundrum of his time. Yes, he was a flawed human being who owned many slaves, but the idea of perpetuating the horrid practice sickened him, which is why in his first draft of the Declaration he included this passage. And note that while virtually every other passage in the document was a mere line or two long, he dedicated a rather lengthy and ardent paragraph to the subject of slavery. Jefferson wrote, quote, "He, the King of England, has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere or incur miserable death in their transportation hither. The piratical warfare, the opprobrium of infidel powers, is the warfare of the Christian King of Great Britain. Determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold, he has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or restrain this execrable commerce, and that this assemblage of horrors might want no fact of distinguished dye, he is now exciting those very people to rise in arms among us, and to purchase that liberty of which he has deprived them, by murdering the people on whom he has obtruded them, thus paying off former crimes committed against the liberties of one people with crimes which he urges them to commit against the lives of another." Unquote. As impassioned as his sentiment was, the paragraph was stricken from the final draft. Unfortunately, this passage upset a couple of states, Georgia and South Carolina, so despite Jefferson's anger, it was removed from the final draft. And as you know, or maybe not know, the Declaration of Independence had to be agreed upon unanimously. All 13 colonies had to agree to every word. Thomas Jefferson was a product of his time, and like other founders later in life, tried to correct the egregious error of slavery by instituting mechanisms to eventually free all enslaved Americans. Thank you for listening.